Hello everyone, and welcome back to Coocopy, the series where I draw new Fakemon for my fan-made Pokemon region based on Florida, the Gladeos region. Happy New Year's, technically? I know Valentine's Day was more than a week ago, but still, somehow, this is my first video of the year. I'll explain a little more at the end, specifically why and my plans for 2025, but for now I think this meme explains my temporary absence pretty well. Anyway, I know what brings you all here today, so we'll get started right away with some Pokemon art, but not, as you might expect, any new Pokemon art. Whereas this is my first video of the year, and it was supposed to come out on New Year's, I had a theme of doing some New Year's resolution type stuff and tackling some redesigns of existing Gladeos Pokemon whom I've wanted to design for some time. So we'll start off with the list of the mons that I feel deserve a redesign so that they can reach the level that I feel they truly deserve. I'll tackle the first half in this video, and I'll leave the rest for the second part, mostly because I've been working on this video for 2 months and I don't want it to come out in June, so I'll give you what I've finished. Of the mons in the Gladeos region that I feel needed a revisit, we have the Choiavior line, the Luchaboar line, Saberodon, specifically Pernamel is absolutely perfect in my eyes, Hypnoxic, and Manatee. There are one or two more that I might add to the list in the next part, depending on circumstances, mostly time, but those are the ones that will definitely be getting redesigns in these videos. Starting today with the big ones, our regional bird, Coocopy, Tralark, and Choiavior, as well as Pipumel, Wallopig, and Luchaboar. First, Coocopy. Coocopy was a case of I was very happy with the original design, but I wanted to punch it up a bit to bring it more in line with the designs that I planned to do for the evolutions. Ironically, this did not end up being the most unchanged out of the three, but I'll get to that later. I altered the way Coocopy's proportions were and changed its pose to make it feel more dynamic, more accurately communicating its personality as a tiny, peppy bird, maybe giving it more of the feeling of one of those birds that hops everywhere, full of energy. This also helped to communicate its minuscule size. I also ended up playing with the idea of its beak blending into its mask, similarly to what I did with the Gladeos line, and I ended up really liking how that aspect looked in this design, on top of how it allows for a fun visual similarity between two similar Pokemon in the region. The final thing I did was change the colors to make them more vibrant, and also bring them closer into line with Choiavior's lighter colors. You'll see they're not an exact match, but it brings the two designs closer in a way that, in my opinion, is a bit more visually appealing. The final change that I made was adding a music note shape to the feather at the end of the wing, as that was something that I really wanted to be consistent throughout the line in all three stages, as a literal representation of a songbird. Coocopy, the songbird Pokemon. They can perfectly mimic any noise they hear. Their favorite noises to copy are the calls of other bird Pokemon. It is unknown whether or not Coocopy has their own call, as they are always mimicking others. The songs of Coocopy flocks differ depending on the environment they are found in. In the countryside, their songs consist of the sounds of woodland Pokemon like Kricketot, while in the cities they often mimic the car horns and sirens of heavy traffic. For Tralark, I started the redesign with the wings. Out of all three stages, the original Tralark was by far my least favorite, just because of how forgettable it ended up being in the end. It was the second stage of a songbird, yes, but just that with not much else to make it its own thing. I actually sat down and sketched out a design for the wings that more or less made it into the final look in September of last year when I was visiting family for a week, and this small doodle was one of the main motivations for me to redo this design. I've been very mindful this season not to release a design that I am unpleased with, which is a big contributor to the longer production times recently, but some involuntarily slipped through the cracks. I wanted to strike a balance with this mon, making it look related to the other two enough that it's believable, and also making it look like a logical step above Coocopy, unlike the previous version that looked a lot more like an alternate pre-evolution to Choiavior. It took me a long time to do this design, mostly because I wasn't quite sure what I wanted, in the way that it took me over 8 hours across a period of a few weeks, because I just couldn't find something that I was happy with. But finally, I had a breakthrough with a design that kept the elements that I liked from the original, the music note in the eye, and added some other aspects like the notes on the wings, and a tail pattern that looked as though it were sheet music. The version looked dynamic and more purposeful, beyond just being a vague sort of shapeless bird that the original was. It looks slightly more related to Coocopy than it does Choiavior, but that's sort of on purpose to give the final form a feeling that it's far more powerful than the others. Tralark, the songbird Pokemon and the evolved form of Coocopy. Using their voices as their main form of attack, they can let out a powerful sonic boom that can knock foes off their feet. Their high intelligence allows them to mimic sounds perfectly, and in captivity, a Tralark may learn numerous human words. They are known to migrate based on the seasons, and during a time of seasonal shift, one can guess where a Tralark has recently traveled to based on what its call sounds like. Funnily enough, when I started my redesign project, I thought Choiavior was my quote-unquote problem design of the line. But the more I mentally took it apart as I redesigned it, I realized that there was a lot that I really love about the design. So much so that when I was sketching, I really just ended up drawing this Pokemon again, which felt like a complete waste of time. So I took a step back and really considered what I disliked about the design and found that my main problem, similarly to Tralark before it, was in the shape of the wings. Not the whole wing, mind you. I absolutely adore the inner part of the wing with the overlapping musical note feathers. That's actually part of the reason why I went back and did the other two to bring those aspects into their designs. But my problem is with the outer part of the wings, because I feel like I rushed that aspect in the original, and you can probably tell. I wanted them to be fuller and rounder, more of a considered shape, but still with sharp ends and the sheet music-like markings. I went for the more is less approach, both with the number of the feathers, but also how I simplified the implied movement. I was trying to show that the wings were flapping in the original with the angle that the feathers were made, but the whole thing felt over-designed, which is ironic because it was entirely the opposite problem that led to that outcome. I changed the colors slightly to bring them closer to the other two palettes, but I wound up going back with the original color palette, as using the palette from the other two forms left this Pokemon feeling far too dark, leaving it without the striking punch of light white colors that the original had. Choiavior, the soaring Pokemon and the evolved form of Tralark. Fierce, solitary hunters, Choiavior's call is louder than the roar of a jet engine. They hunt small Pokemon and stun them with their thunderous calls. Though most of their lives they soar through the skies alone, once a year they will return to the roosting grounds of their flock and spend time with their lifelong mates. These gatherings of Choiavior are called an orchestra. Now this is sort of applicable to all of the Pokemon in this video, but the first two Pokemon of the Pipumel line were a huge reason for me to make this video. Shortly before the original video with this Pokemon aired, but right after the video was finished, I had an idea for a redesign for this Pokemon that I've been cooking up for over a year. I really liked how Luchaboar looked with the fold of fat over its eyes. There was a great exaggeration of how a lot of wild boars can look in real life, and the idea of using this aspect for the entire line really appealed to me. So I created this new version of Pipumel with the covered eyes look as a central aspect of the design. I also changed a few more minor things like the body markings to bring it more into line with the others, as well as change the look of its boxing glove tail so it looked more like, well, a balled up fist instead of a red ball with egg bump. Pipumel, the punch pig Pokemon. Not originally from the Gladeos region, Pipumel hail from a far-off land and were brought here by human explorers. The population that made their home in the wilds of this region are hyper-aggressive, attacking everything in sight. Although Pipumel thankfully cannot do much damage due to their small stature, the same cannot be said for their evolved forms. Wallopig now was the stage that I sketched out right before that video that I talked about came out, and this redesign was the impetus for how the rest of the design ended up looking in this rework. Very little changed between this version and that pen and paper sketch that I did. Not only did I cover the eyes like I did with its evolution, but I changed the way that it was proportioned, as to put it more in line with how its final form looked. Like Tralark before it, it was important that this stage looked like a natural progression between the first and third form, rather than an alternate first form, which the original being so round kind of seemed too close to that. I replaced the mouth with a scruffy chin section that was similar to the final form, and made the tusks more prominent, as that would be one of the main things that I emphasized in the final form. Though the original Wallopig was a design that I was lukewarm on at the beginning, this redesign has not only changed it from my least to my favorite of the three in the evolutionary line, but it's also made it one of my favorites in the entire series. Wallopig, the punch pig Pokemon and the evolved form of Pipumel. They love battle and seek it out at every possible opportunity. Though they are proud and tote themselves around as masterful combatants, it is observed that these Pokemon often fight dirty in a pinch, using the hand-like appendage on their tail to their advantage. Their growing tusks make for lethal weapons, and wild Pokemon will often choose to flee when Wallopig enter their territory, as opposed to stay and fight. Like with Choiavior, not too much changed with Luchaboar. I liked the overall design, but there were several small choices that I felt warranted a full redo. At minimum, its art needed to be touched up to keep the same standard with the rest of the Pokedex. I cleaned up the unthoughtful line work between the body and the arms, which was another big reason that I wanted to tackle some of these redesigns in the first place. I also made the tusks far more defined, as though they were big and prominent in the original. Their shape was kind of weak, for lack of a better word, and I wanted them to be a very strong aspect of this design. I added the secondary tail that I intended to add from the beginning, but I can't remember for the life of me why I left it out in the original. Possibly I was being just lazy. I will say, though the overall pose changed slightly in orientation, I loved the legs in the original so much that I literally traced over them to maintain the exact same pose. And with that, my redesigns for this episode were complete. Luchaboar, the punch pig Pokemon and the evolved form of Wallopig. Thought of as a bit of a bully in the wilds of Gladeos, Luchaboar are famous for their violent tendencies. It is notable that of the entire evolutionary line, Luchaboar is the only one who poses any real threat to humans. Though this event is rare, when a Luchaboar does happen upon a town, it will often take the strongest trainers of a community to drive them away. Until this happens, it is common practice for Luchaboar to make a camp outside of town where they stockpile things that they stole from the townsfolk and harass any who leave or enter the town's borders. So there are my 6 redesigns for some of the earlier Mons in the series. I will have the others out to you before long, but it's already been multiple months and I just wanted to give you guys something to chew on. I knew this going in, but every time I start doing a video where I redesign some of my own art, I forget how challenging it can be, not to mention time consuming. It can be challenging enough to recreate a different artist's work, but when it's your own, it takes a good amount of effort and time to work around your own blind spots, those very blind spots of which were probably a big reason why you're unhappy with your own art in the first place. So those of you who are just interested in the art and new Pokemon, that's all I've got for you today, but I do have a few updates for the channel, as well as a bit of an exploration into where I've been for the past 2 and sort of 6 months. A perfect storm of a January, which included the monkey wrench of me being really sick for like a week and a half, combined with a little bit of artist block earlier in the month, really did a number on the production of this video. But that's not to say that I wasn't expecting to have a difficult time producing this episode. This year, it's one of my goals to finally buy a house. So as part of that, I've been working a lot of hours at my day job to save up for a down payment, and of course, that doesn't leave a lot of time for YouTube. Eventually, I do plan to cut back again and spend more time doing this and on my other passions and with friends and family, but until then, I definitely say you could expect a slower upload schedule than usual. Definitely not earlier this year slow, but I wouldn't expect an episode every week for a while. That's the bad news, but there is good news too, and that's what I plan to do this year. Of course, I can't plan a lot, but I do plan to finish off this season of Pokepaint sometime mid to late summer, if I get done everything I want to do in the series. And that, of course, means two things. One, Season 4 later this year, and possibly a contest. Last season, I did a contest where you could submit Fakemon on the Discord to have a chance to have them be included in the Pokepaint project. And if there's enough interest for it, I would love to do a contest again. As such, I will be giving the Discord server a bit of a makeover, which it desperately deserves, including streamlining some of the chats and adding a general chat, as well as possibly getting some Discord moderators. As my plans apply for my other projects, there are two that I'm going to continue this year. The first is History of the Future, which I know a small section of this community is going to be really excited for. I'm actually working on a few episodes right now that will hopefully come out during the month of March and will break the long absence that series has been experiencing. I plan to work on that project mainly in the colder months when I can't do my other projects outside. And in the summer and early fall, I want to shift to focusing more on my lightsaber project that I started last year. I started actually building 2 hilts already in November, but you can expect those later in the year. I had to stop as temperatures just got too cold. My shop isn't heated, and most of the project is done outside in my parents' backyard in New England, so I definitely don't want to be outside this time of year when it's like below 10 degrees and like 3 feet of snow. So keep that in mind as a general outline for what to expect for the rest of the year. But until then, as always, a special thanks to my patrons who are appearing on screen now and support the channel by making projects like this possible. If you would like to join them in their support, you can do so at the link in the description for as little as $3 a month. Thank you to all my patrons, and as always, thank you all for watching. If you liked this video, then leave a like, and if you want to see other videos like it, then subscribe, and turn on the bell to get notified when I upload next.